Patricia?
Thank you. What my task is to talk about food system equity. And when I use the term equity, I think of three things. One is meeting people's basic needs, the most fundamental needs that they have, access to resources in order for them to be able to meet those needs, and then participation in designing the systems that allow them to meet those needs. So basically, what it all comes down to is sort of who do we want to sustain and what do we want to sustain in terms of people and in terms of systems. And I was thinking last night about what does this really mean? It's not just about distribution. Yes, we need to equitably distribute what we produce, but we also need to equitably produce what it is that we distribute. Right now, when we talk about where we're headed and where we want to go, there's also the question that we're all addressing here, which is where are we located right now? And where we're located right now in terms of equity is that what people have, what people don't have, is determined largely by circumstance and accident of birth. And I don't think that's a very good standard for determining who has what access to resources and opportunities. So I'm going to just touch very briefly on a couple of points within these three categories of basic needs, access to resources, and participation or decision making. So in terms of basic needs, we've heard about hunger and food prices. More people go hungry today than at any point in human history. There's 24,000 people a day who die because they don't have access to healthful food. And food prices are the trend, at least in the last year or two, is that food prices are skyrocketing. For some of us, this is inconvenient. For some of us, it's difficult. And for some of us, it is devastating. And at the same time, many agribusiness profits are continuing to go up. So there's this disconnect happening. In the United States, there's 36 million people a year who are food insecure or at risk of hunger. And as Gail mentioned, with health disparities, these are not evenly distributed. You're much more likely to be at risk of hunger if you're female, if you're a single mother, if you are Latino, African American, or Native American. So there's a gender and racial inequity built in to the fundamental inequity of hunger. And we all know that hunger is related to poverty. In a market system, you're hungry if you can't afford to buy food. And wages in the food system tend to be very low. These jobs tend to be contingent, not stable, sometimes dangerous jobs. And we talk very appropriately about the needs of farmers and the needs of farm workers. But one data point I just wanted to share is that 93% of the jobs in the food sector are not involved in production. They're in retail, they're in processing, they're in transport, and I think we need to be paying much closer attention to wages and working conditions throughout the food system. In terms of access to resources, if we're talking about people being able to meet their own needs, the most basic is land. And farmland in the United States, the ownership is highly concentrated. Something like 4% of people own half of the farmland in the United States. Women own 5% of that farmland, Latinos own 1%, and African Americans own 0.5% of the farmland in the United States. In retailing, concentration is accelerating. In the last 5 years, the concentration in grocery retailing has doubled. Now there's 5 companies that control 50% of grocery retailing. A key question that we need to address here is participation. Who's making the decisions in the policies that do determine who gets what in the food system. And historically, these policies have been determined by a fairly select group of people. And this is true not only in terms of setting federal, local, and state policy, but also in the committees that implement these policies and in the scientists who decide what are the important questions that we're going to ask and what are the solutions that we're going to be able to come up with. And we've talked about research and development in agriculture, and while that is going down, and I think that that is a serious problem, I want to point out that less than 1% of the R&D that we do allocate is allocated to asking fundamental questions about social equity and social justice, things about class, race, and gender in the food system. And less than 1% is simply not enough. I want to end, just like Gail, on a note of hope. I think that while the problems we face in the food system are extensive, they're shocking, and in many cases truly gut-wrenching, we're also at a point in human history that we've never been before. The crisis that we're facing is putting us all in a situation where things that we thought were working, we now know aren't working. Things we thought we knew, we now realize that we don't know. And it's a time, in a way, to start all over again. And the note of hope here is that the situation that we're in is because of choices we've made as people, or the choices that we have allowed to be made for us as people. The system we have was created by us, and we can create a very, very different system if only we have the will to do so. And I think that we do have that will. And the voices of everyone who's affected, particularly the most vulnerable people, need to be included in determining how we're going to move forward. So much is moving in the right direction, as Gail was pointing out, with CSAs and farmers markets. And I believe that together we can create an equitable food system, and in fact that we must create an equitable food system, and that all of our lives quite literally depend on it.
Great. Thank you, Patricia.